Okay. Right. Okay. So let's do a recap. Can you get your books out and let's do a recap what we've learned so far. Okay. So we do a little bit of a reminder. Okay. Of what we did last class. Get your books out. Get your books out. Okay. And look at your notes. Look at the notes you took around the story. Okay. Okay, so I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to do my best to project, but you may have to really try to listen, okay? Because you can tell I'm a bit rough there. Okay, so let's just do a really basic recap. Okay, so who are the characters in the story? Carla,
Sylvia.
Clark, Sylvia, and who? Flora. Oh yeah, Flora. Yeah, of course, and Leon. And Leon, of course, dies. Okay, he's actually, I think he's dead before the story actually starts. So before the actual, what we call the diegetic time. Okay, the diegetic time. Someone check the spelling because I haven't written this up on the board. Okay, is it E or D or O? Just check that. Diegetic time is the story of the. Is the actual story time. Okay, so what we're doing is we're getting roughly, I think maybe a week or so in the life of Clark and Carla, and then at the end of the story, the narration stops being really congruent with time, and we're sort of heading off into the future. So what we're seeing here is the cycle. Remember I talked about the cycle and the pattern of cycles that's in the story. So we're seeing the buildup of stress and sort of toxic atmosphere between this married couple, and then we're seeing the blow up. Okay, the blow up, which has been what? Which has been orchestrated by who? Who orchestrates the crisis? Carla. Yeah. How does Carla orchestrate the crisis?
By telling Carl that she was being sexually assaulted by a man.
That happened before. Let's look at the actual crisis that's unfolding in the story. Okay, but that led to it. So you're right about that. Okay, you're right about that. But who actually triggers the crisis in this marriage?
Carla, she tells Clark that
No.
Sylvia, that whole story.
No, that led to it. That led to it. Let's talk about. Maybe I'm not being clear here. The actual blow up. Yeah. Yeah, when Carla decides to go over to Sylvia's place and she has that, she has that meltdown, right? She's sitting there talking to Sylvia. Sylvia's just returned from Greece. She's been there for a few weeks. Why did she go to Greece? Why did she go to Greece?
Her husband died and she wanted to.
Yeah. Her husband died and she wanted to do something. She went off with two really close women friends, was there for a few weeks, just did it to, maybe, take some time off. I mean, when someone's dying, okay, when someone is in the business of dying, it's a really intense time, right? It's very stressful for the caregivers. And so what she does is she goes off to Greece for a few weeks and has a really low-key a vacation with a couple of friends. She comes back and she meets up with Carla again. She gives Carla this nice gift, right, of the little, the little statue with the racing horse, right? And and at that point, what happens is that Carla starts howling, right, and starts, breaking down and having a meltdown, right? And of course, that's when everything comes out. Right, that she's having a hard time with Clark, that the husband hates her, all this stuff, all this information starts coming out. And that's, of course, when Sylvia decides that she's going to help her. She gives her clothes and money, calls her friend in Toronto, calls Ruth in Toronto, gets her on the bus, right? So that's the actual blow up, okay? You're right that the two people who said that the lies instigated it are right. It's just that I'm talking about the actual end result, okay, the actual blow up. So, okay, so where were we headed after that? Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. And, okay, so, all right, I think we left off at the part where where she has the dream about Flora. Okay, so remember, we're going to go over this story with a fine-tooth comb. So it may, the analysis I'm doing may get slightly repetitive. I apologize for that. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to give you a really thorough analysis so that when you start doing this yourself, okay, you're going to understand exactly all the things I'm looking for, or the things that go into making a really good analysis. And because we're going over the story in order of the story, that's why sometimes things get repeated, okay? Because things show up again, right? So especially the pattern of cycles shows up a lot, right? Especially, what ways so far have we seen that the cycles turn up? What have we seen already so far? Someone said it. Yep. The weather. Yep. We're going to see the weather. Okay. Yep. The relationship. What else? What happened to the roof of the exercise ring? Yeah, it broke. Okay, so part of it came down. When did it come down? In the storm, right? When there was a storm, right? The 15-minute storm, right? And so as a result of the roof being off of the exercise ring, what did Carla have to do? Yeah, she had to make a shorter track, okay? And that's really important. That was actually, that was actually pointed out to me by a student. Okay, a student was the one who noticed that and said, oh, Miss, does this shorter track mean something? I thought, oh my gosh, yes, it does. Okay, it means that the cycles, just like the cycles in an abusive relationship, start to get smaller. Okay, well, I'll say smaller, they get shorter in terms of the time period, right? The toxic atmosphere, the blow up, and the makeup start to become shorter, take up shorter periods of time, right? Okay, so this is what we're seeing. We're in the first, what I think is probably the first one, the first cycle. Okay. All right, can you go up to the page where it says, up until 3 years ago, Carla never really looked at mobile homes. Okay, so up until 3 years ago, Carla never really looked at mobile homes. She didn't call them that either. Like her parents, she would have thought that mobile homes pretentious. Some people lived in trailers, and that was all there was to it. It's open. Okay. Okay. It's all right. One trailer was no different from another. When Carla moved in here, when she chose this life with Clark. Okay, so look at that. She's choosing this life with Clark. One of the things about Alice Munro that we're going to notice here very strongly is that she holds her heroines responsible for the choices that they make, right? Yes, Carla is a victim, it's true, right? She's caught in a really bad place, but it's also the result of some of the choices that she made. Can you put your computer down? Yeah, just because we'll put it up when we go to do work. Okay, all right. So so when Carla moved in here, when she chose this life with Clark, okay, please underline that. She began to see things in a new way. After that, she started saying mobile home, and she liked to see how people had fixed them up. The kind of curtains they had hung, the way they had painted the trim, the ambitious decks or patios or extra rooms that had been built on. She could hardly wait to get at such improvements herself. Okay, so one of the things that we know about Carla is she comes from a very middle-class background, right? The house that her parents live in is described, right? That there's sprinklers, that there's a powder room, right? There are vacations. So it's very much the case that they live in probably a suburban life and with a typical suburban house, right? And this is where it's the kind of home that Carla says that she has to leave because when she goes off with Clark, she's looking for what? For a more authentic life. So in other words, she's criticizing the materialism represented by her parents. Now, her parents is her father is actually her stepfather. Okay, it's not her real father, as we're going to see. So, Munro doesn't shy away from things like class issues either. So what she's doing here is she's showing us, right? Because trailer homes are usually a step down. Okay, and so when she's choosing this more authentic life with Clark, she's also choosing to go down a level in terms of income and social standing, right? It's important for us to recognize that, okay? Because that goes hand in glove with the level of intelligence that Clark possesses. And remember what I said last class about Clark, that he, the fact that he believed what Carla was saying about Leon trying to get her to do, perform sexual acts on him is ridiculous, right? I mean, Leon's dying. There's no way that someone that sick is going to be interested in that, right? But the fact that he believes it tells us something, right? And again, I'll repeat this again. That doesn't mean that he's not cunning. He's cunning, right? He sure is, in terms of sort of criminal thinking. So it's important that we see that the kind of home that she's moved to is a step down, right, in terms of the social standing. Clark had gone along with her ideas for a while. He had built new steps and spent a lot of time looking for an old wrought iron railing for them. He didn't make any complaint about the money spent on paint for the kitchen and bathroom or material for curtains. Her paint job was hasty. She didn't know at that time that you should take the hinges off the cupboard doors or that you should line the curtains, which had since faded. Okay, what Clark balked at was tearing up the carpet, which was the same in every room and the thing that she had most counted on replacing. I want you to look at this carpet because the carpet is very symbolic. Okay. Okay, so it was divided into small brown squares, each with a pattern of darker brown and rust and tan squiggles and shapes. For a long time she had thought these were the same squiggles and shapes, arranged in the same way in each square. Then when she had more time, a lot of time, to examine them, okay, notice that, a lot of time, right, because the rain and the lack of business, right, she decided that there were 4 patterns joined together to make identical larger squares. Sometimes she could pick out the arrangement easily, and sometimes she had to work to see it. Now remember what I said last time, the second pattern that's common in the story is the idea of knowledge coming towards us, right, but us not being able to, or that the characters are not able to discern what is actually the problem until it's right in front of them. Okay, just the same way that when Flora comes running at them in the in the combination of the light and the fog, she just looks like this big kind of hairy ball of something, maybe even an alien, kind of coming at them. And it's not until she's right there in person and almost butting up to him that they understand, oh, of course, it's the goat, right? So here, there's this idea of perception, right? And it's important that she's trying to figure out what is this pattern on the floor, right? Because obviously the carpet is coming in something that looks like tiles. The carpet is tiled, and she's trying to work out the patterns. It's important that that's on the floor. Why would it be important that that's on the floor and not on the wall, for example? Or why would that be important from a symbolic term, do you think? Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's a good, yeah, that's one good thing, yeah. What might be another one? Yeah, the floor is the foundation, and she's having trouble figuring it out, right? Right? It's just like her marriage, just like what the heck is going on with this man, that he wants me to do these crazy things, right? That things are not clear, right? When she gets, the thing is, Clark probably didn't show it doesn't say so directly in the story, but I think that any of us who come to this story with a knowledge of what an abusive relationship looks like, we have to understand he didn't look abusive when she fell in love with him, right? And it's the same thing with anybody who gets it. And this cuts across genders, okay? That sometimes it's the woman who's the bad guy, right? And sometimes it's the man. In this case, it's the man. But he didn't put his worst self forward, right, at the beginning. And so, of course, as he's starting to reveal who he really is, with these really crazy ideas about blackmailing the neighbor, I mean, harebrained or what, right? It's shaking the foundation of her life with him. And she's looking at this Flora trying to figure it out, and it's not making sense, just like the whole foundation of her relationship with this man is not making sense. Okay? So this kind of stuff is important. These symbols are important. All right. Okay. So she did this when it was raining outside, and Clark's mood weighted down all their inside space, and he did not want to pay attention to anything but the computer screen. Okay, so here we're getting a little paragraph about how heavy the environment is around him. But the best thing to do then was to invent or remember some job to do in the barn. Okay, so she's making excuses, right, to get away from him. The horses would not look at her when she was unhappy, but Flora, who was never tied up, would come and rub against her and look up with an expression that was not quite sympathy. It was more like comradely mockery in her shimmering yellow-green eyes. Okay, that little bit is very important there, okay, because what it does, sorry. What it does is it establishes the relationship, okay, between Flora and Carla. Now listen, let's look a little bit at Flora's past. Flora had been a half-grown kid. Okay, kid is the word for what? Baby goat, right? Baby goats are called kids, okay? They're not called puppies or kittens, they're called kids. Flora had been a half-grown kid when Clark brought her home from a farm where he had gone to bargain for some horse tackle. The people there were giving up on the country life, or at least on the raising of animals, and they had sold their horses but failed to get rid of their goats. He had heard about how a goat was able to bring a sense of ease and comfort into a horse stable, and he wanted to try it. They had meant to breed her someday, but there had never been any signs of her coming into heat. Okay, so look at what she's there for, right? What is her role? First of all, what's her role in the stable? I mean, it's very clear. What does it just say there? Just to keep peace, right, among the goats. Among the horses, right? That she's like that goats can keep the peace. What might this be on a bigger scale? Yeah. She's there as a mediator, right? She's there as a mediator, for sure, right? And that's why it's important that she disappears, right? It's important that she disappears because that means what? Okay, that means that the mediator, that this safe creature, or this creature that's there to spread safety, right, disappears. Yeah.
Is this story supposed to be seen as kind of fiction in the sense that it's so unlikely that the ghost would just appear in that moment of
I don't. It doesn't seem. You know what? It doesn't seem unlikely to me, and you know why? Because I've lived out in the country, and if you don't tie up animals, or if you don't put them in the barn at night, yeah, this can happen. I mean, it doesn't happen very often anymore because there's so many laws, right? But if you don't house your animals at night, right, I grew up with dogs and cats, and they lived out in the barn, and the dog had a doghouse, right? And we didn't tie the dog up. So if the dog, my mom used to joke around. The dog's name was Zorro, right? Black lab, big black lab, right? And my mom would joke around when we didn't see him for a while. Say, oh, he's out looking for a girlfriend. Or, oh, no, he's got a girlfriend over in the other farm, right? So the thing is, it actually can happen. But it just, unless, because you have to understand, in cities, animals and pets are so regulated, especially now recently, with all the stuff that, the mayor has made all these rules about it. But out in the country, especially really out in the country, like where you're not even close to a town, people let their animals go. Why not? I mean, the only danger is that they'll get hit by a car. But, the thing is that, you're talking about, you're talking about spaces, like physical spaces that are so big, right? Like, there's a lot of, the blocks, like the country block is huge, right? So yeah, it could happen. I mean, it's a miraculous coincidence, but it doesn't surprise me. Really, it doesn't. So it's not that far-fetched. Although I can see why you might think it. Right? Okay. All right. Okay. So at first she had been Clark's pet entirely, following him everywhere, dancing for his attention. She was quick and graceful and provocative as a kitten, and her resemblance to a guileless girl in love had made them both laugh. Okay, so she's almost like a child here, okay? But as she grew older, she seemed to attach herself to Carla, and in this attachment she was suddenly much wiser, less skittish. She seemed capable, instead, of a subdued, ironic sort of humor. Carla's behavior with the horses was tender and strict and rather maternal, but the comradeship with Flora was quite different, Flora allowing her no sense of superiority. Okay, so her relationship with the goat is actually quite close, okay, that she has a relationship that is, what we would call anthropomorphic, right? And anthropomorphism is when we start to endow animals with human characteristics. Now, it used to be that was really laughed at. People would say, oh, come on, dogs don't understand, or cats, they're animals. But in fact, if you look at a lot of the recent research, they actually do understand a lot more than we realize. So the thing is, it doesn't really matter, and it does, whether it's real or not, it doesn't matter, because she's there and she provides Carla with some sort of an emotional cushion, right? Now, how realistic, it is mentally inside the goat's head, we don't know, but we know that for sure she's a comfort to Carla, and her going missing is an issue, right? That it's upsetting to her. Okay, so at first she had, still no sign of Flora, she said, as she pulled off her barn boots. Clark had posted a lost goat notice on the web. Okay, so, all right. Not so far, he said in a preoccupied but not unfriendly voice. He suggested, not for the first time, that Flora might have just gone off to find herself a billy. And that's true. Okay, that is how country people think, right? Okay, the animal's gone off to mate, right? Okay, so no word. Now, look at the running commentary, right? And we have to remember that Carla is tense because she knows Clark is going to start bugging her again, right? To start, like, let's go and let's do the blackmail thing. And of course, Carla knows how ridiculous it is. Right? So no word about Mrs. Jameson. Carla put the kettle on. Clark was humming to himself, as he often did when he sat in front of the computer. Sometimes he talked back to it. Bullshit, he would say, replying to some challenge. Or he would laugh, but could not remember what the joke was when she asked him afterwards. Carla called, "Do you want some tea? Do you want tea?" And to her surprise, he got up and came into the kitchen. "So," he said. "So, Carla." "What?" "So she phoned." "Who?" "Her Majesty, Queen Sylvia. She just got back." "I didn't hear the car." Look at this conversation. "I didn't ask you if you did." Right? In other words, it doesn't matter what you think. Right? Right? So, right? Like, the pick up on this stuff, because it's really, this guy is being, Okay, so I didn't hear the car. I didn't ask you. So what did she phone for? She wants you to go and help her straighten up the house. That's what she said, tomorrow. What did you tell her? I told her, sure, but you better phone up and confirm. Carla said, I don't see why I have to if you told her. Okay, I cleaned up her house before she left. I don't see what there could be to do so soon. Maybe some coons got in and made a mess of it. Okay? Okay, I don't have to phone her right this minute. I want to drink my tea and I want to have a shower. The sooner the better. Carla took her tea into the bathroom, calling back, we have to go to the laundromat. Even when the towels dry out, they smell moldy. We're not changing the subject, Carla. Right? Right? This guy's like a freight train. He's not going to be derailed. Right? Even after she got into the shower, he stood outside the door and called her. I am not going to let you off the hook, Carla. She thought he might still be standing there when she came out, but he was back at the computer. She dressed as if she was going to town. She hoped that if they could get out of here, go to the laundromat, get a takeout at the cappuccino place, they might be able to talk in a different way. Some release might be possible. Okay, so some release. Some release from what? The tension, right? The tension, right? There's a very tense relationship, right, that's going on here, right? Like he's not asking her stuff. He's not being nice and saying, do you want this or would you like to do this? He's saying, go do it. He's using the imperative, right? What is the imperative? Does anyone know what the imperative is linguistically? Yeah. Yeah, it's a command. Sit up, eat up, eat your meal. Stop talking. Right? Right? It has that sort of forceful, do what I say sound to it. Okay? There are some languages. I used to teach English as a second language to foreign students who were in Montreal. And there are some languages where they, like Dutch is one, for example, and Dutch people are very nice, right? So just I want to say this, they're very nice people. But when you translate English to English and Dutch and back and forth, they use the imperative a lot, right? Because it's an echo of their own language. So consequently, it's like we have to train them to say, no, you can't really say that to people because it sounds like you're ordering them. It sounds like you're ordering them around. You have to actually ask people. We have this kind of politeness built into at least the Canadian usage of English, right? So I always found that really funny because they would end up sounding like, like stormtroopers who were saying, you do that, and yet, Dutch people are probably some of the nice, they're lovely people. But the way that they used English, the way that they translated it in their head sounded very forceful. Okay. All right. Okay. So she went to the living room with a brisk step and put her arms around him from behind. Okay, this is an important moment, okay? But as soon as she did that, a wave of grief swallowed her up, right? It must have been the heat of the shower, loosening her tears, and she bent over him, all crumbling and crying. He took his hands off the keyboard but sat still. Just don't be mad at me, she said. I'm not mad. I hate it when you're like this, that's all. I'm like this because you're mad. Don't tell me what I am. You're choking me. Start supper. And that was what she did. Okay, so this is a couple that's really not getting along, as we can see. Okay, and what is the wave of grief? Okay, and this isn't a trick question. I've already talked about it. What is the wave of grief? Why does she feel? What is the wave of grief? You think psychologically? Guilt. Yeah. Sylvia is nice to, I'm sure I talked about this last class. I repeat myself, so forgive me. But Sylvia's been nice to her. Sylvia's a nice woman. She's a neighbor. She's trying to help her. She brought her, Sylvia went to all this trouble to bring this lovely statue, this little, statue back to her, this little, the racehorse. And it's clear that they formed something of a bond when she was over there and her husband was dying. Right? So imagine, right? She's being asked to betray her in the worst way, right? It's a sort of thing where it's one thing if we act badly, right? It's one thing because all of us are capable of acting badly, and if we're rushed or, we just don't have time or we're in a bad space, we can all treat other human beings badly. But it's another thing when we do it to someone who we really like. It feels worse, right? It feels like, when someone who's been really good to you and you end up doing something bad to them, inadvertently or not, right? It's worse, right? Because the guilt you feel, it just is sickening. So this is why she's being swallowed up by this grief. Because the woman that she's being asked to betray, right, do this really stupid thing with, right, blackmail her, is someone who's been lovely to her, and someone who likes her, and clearly likes her, and someone who she's shared that kind of, intimacy that happens when everyone's attending the bed of a dying person. And I can tell you that for a fact. I mean, when my mother lived with me, she had a stroke. She wasn't dying, and she's still alive, actually. But there is a certain kind of intimacy that springs up around sick rooms, right? You'll see it happening at hospitals, right? Where if you have someone who's sick, everyone automatically goes into a different space, sort of mentally. Do you remember when was it H1N1? Yeah, the H1N1 flu. And my mom, who was living with me at the time, had to go into the Lachine General because she was having a crisis of she had a lot of health problems. She'd had a stroke and was paralyzed. And there were some parents there. We were in the isolation ward because the H1N1 had come, was around at the time. And because of her symptoms, they put her into isolation. I didn't think she had it, but they didn't want to take a chance, so they put them in isolation. Well, I was there, and there were some parents there, right, of kids or young people your age, and their kids had the H1N1, right? And I'll tell you something, that just that horrible panic of being in that waiting room and seeing these parents who were scared to death, right, really scared for their kids. And the kind of closeness that developed among all of us who were sitting there. Like, I knew my mom was probably going to be okay. Like, I knew she didn't have it. And I also thought, like, she's in her 80s. I mean, if she dies, it's not the same thing as, an 18-year-old dying. That's a lot more tragic, right? But, when we are attending the bedside of terribly sick people, right, atmospheres of intimacy spring up. And they're very real and they're very powerful. And that's another reason why this is so awful for her. Okay? All right. Okay. All right. All right. So let's go to, and it started when they read the obituary. So we're going to flip over a page, okay? Okay, so it had started. So here's the explanation. Okay, so here's the explanation. It started when they read the obituary, Mr. Jameson's obituary. That was in the city paper, and his face had been on the evening news. Up until the year before, they had known the Jamesons only as neighbors who kept to themselves. She taught botany at a college 40 miles away, so she had to spend a good deal of her time on the road. He was a poet. Everybody knew that much, but he seemed to be occupied with other things. For a poet, and for an old man, perhaps 20 years older than Mrs. Jameson, he was rugged and active. He improved the drainage system on his place, cleaning out the culvert and lining it with rocks. He dug and planted and fenced a vegetable garden, cut paths through the woods, looked after repairs on the house. Okay, so you've got a marriage of two people next door, one of whom is younger. Now, mind you, they're both older, right? They're both, Sylvia is at least middle-aged, right? She's probably at least in her 40s or 50s, and her husband is 20 years older. Okay, so the house itself was an odd-looking triangular affair that he had built years ago with some friends on the foundation of an old wrecked farmhouse. Those people were spoken of as hippies, though Mr. Jameson must have been a bit old for that, even then, before Mrs. Jameson's time. There was a story that they grew marijuana in the woods, sold it, and stored the money in sealed glass jars, which were buried around the property. Clark had heard this from people he got to know in town. He said it was bullshit. Yeah, probably is. Else someone would have gotten in and dug it up before now. Okay, so look at why he thinks it's bullshit. Because someone would have gotten in there and dug it up before now. Not that it's not that it's just simply a crazy idea, right? He thinks it's, he thinks it's true, just that people would have found it by now. Okay, so his reasons for thinking that it's a stupid idea are interesting. Okay, they're really revealing, right? Okay, somebody would have found a way to make him tell where it was. Okay, so this is a guy with a criminal mind. When they read the obituary, Carla and Clark learned for the first time that Leon Jameson had been the recipient of a large prize 5 years before his death, a prize for poetry. Nobody had ever mentioned this. It seemed that people could believe in dope money buried in glass jars, but not in money written for poetry. Okay, that's the writer. That's Munro having a bit of fun at our expense. Okay, saying that, yeah, people can believe that before they believe that there's money in poetry. Okay, shortly after this, Clark said, "We could have made him pay." Carla knew at once what he was talking about, but she took it as a joke. "Too late now," she said. "You can't pay once you're dead." "He can't. She could. She's gone to Greece. She's not going to stay in Greece. She didn't know." "I didn't say she did. She doesn't have a clue about it. We could fix that." Carla said, "No, no." Clark went on as if she had not spoken. "We could say we're going to sue. People get money for stuff like that all the time." "How could you do that? You can't sue a dead person." "Threaten to go to the papers. Big-time poet. The papers would eat it up. All we have to do is threaten, and she'd cave in." "You're just fantasizing," Carla said. "You're joking." "No," said Clark. "Actually, I'm not." Carla said she did not want to talk about it anymore, and he said okay. But they talked about it the next day and the next and the next. He sometimes got notions like this that were not practicable, which might even be illegal. He talked about them with growing excitement, and then, she wasn't sure why, he dropped them. If the rain had stopped, if this had turned into something like a normal summer, he might have let this idea go the way of the others. But that had not happened, and during the last month he had harped on the scheme as if it was perfectly feasible and serious. The question was how much money to ask for. Too little, and the woman might not take them seriously. She might be inclined to see that they were bluffing. Too much might get her back up, and she might become stubborn. Okay, it's a ridiculous scheme, right? It's stupid. It's crazy. So here we have this woman, Carla, who's got this husband who keeps insisting on doing this, right? So he's putting her in a really compromised position, right? He's really compromising her a lot. Okay. Okay. And then look at the end of that section. "You were injured. You were molested and humiliated. And I was injured and humiliated because you are my wife. It's a question of respect." Over and over again, he talked to her in this way, and she tried to deflect him, but he insisted. "Promise," he said. "Promise." Okay, so, this is where, that this is really the big problem, okay, that he's not letting this go, right? He thinks that this is a perfectly feasible plan, right? And, as time goes on, and especially now that she's back, the pressure is going to build, right? So can you start to see why she might want to create a conflict of some sort, right? To somehow subsume it, right? To somehow eclipse it, to take it over, so that she will be able to talk him out of it reasonably, right? Because he's obviously being a bit crazy. Okay, does that make sense? You're kind of looking at me like it doesn't make sense. Does it make sense? Yeah, okay. Because often, I mentioned this last class, but that's what she's doing. She's reaching, she's getting more and more cornered as the days pass, right? It's getting worse. The pressure, oh my God, and he's going to, and I'm sure she's afraid that he's going to do it, even if, right, she doesn't. So, this is why things, culminate, and her sitting in front of Sylvia and just howling her lungs out, right? She's at that point where it's like, what the heck am I going to do? Right? She's caught between these two people, and her crazy husband and this woman who's been nice to her, right? Okay. This is a really uncomfortable situation, right? And Munro's very good, right, at putting people in these really uncomfortable situations, right? Putting pressure on them from both sides to see what's going to happen. Okay. Right, so here now we have the explanation, okay? This was because of what she had told him, things she could not now retract or deny. Okay, how many people picked up on this the first time you read it? Yeah, some people did, yeah. Okay, this was because of what she had told him. And it's because this is dirty pillow talk, okay? And so we're all adults in this room. We all know this happens. There used to be, when I was a young person, there were those phone sex lines, that I don't think they have them anymore, or do they? Maybe they do. But it's like, it's the kind of dirty talk. It's foreplay in sex, right? Sometimes he gets interested in me, the old guy. Sometimes he calls me into the room when she's not there. Yes. Okay, this is Clark answering yes. When she has to go out shopping and the nurse isn't there either. Okay, a lucky inspiration of hers, one that instantly pleased him, right? So she's got this husband who's really irascible, difficult to please. It's a stressful situation. She's walking on eggshells. And so she's found something that makes him happy, right? She's found something that has almost like distracted him, right? Sometimes people do this with dogs and with kids, okay? I know that, a couple of times I've had dogs that I've had to train. The dogs just keep bugging you and bugging you and bugging you. And sometimes the best thing you can do is distract them, right? Rather than deal with them. So you find some way of distracting the situation, right? So, yeah. So that's what she's doing. She's found something that makes him happy, right? The problem is it's toxic in and of itself, or it becomes toxic. What starts off as a fun sort of fantasy, shared fantasy, right, turns into this nightmare, right? Okay. Okay, so what do you do then? Do you go in? She played shy. Sometimes. He calls you into his room. So, Carla, so then I go in to see what he wants. So what does he want? This was asked and told in whispers, even if there was nobody to hear, even when they were in the neverland of their bed. A bedtime story in which the details were important and had to be added to every time, and this with the convincing reluctance, shyness, giggles, dirty. And it was not only he who was eager and grateful, she was too. Eager to please and excite him, to excite herself, grateful every time it still worked. Okay, so she's found something, she's found a sort of temporary solution to the tension that's between them. It works, right? But it turns on her, right? It works for a while, but then it turns on her. And in one part of her mind, it was true. She saw the randy old man, the bump. Okay, and you have to imagine this is in her mind's eye. It's not really happening. Okay, in one part of her mind, it was true. She saw the randy old man, the bump he made in the sheet, bedridden indeed, almost beyond speech, but proficient in sign language, indicating his desire, trying to nudge and finger her into complicity, into obligating stunts and intimacies. Her refusal of a necessity, but also perhaps strangely, slightly disappointing to Clark. Okay, so this is like she's constructing a fantasy. Okay, and she's telling the narrative. She's creating the narrative in a way that's designed for maximum impact. Okay, oh well, I'm shy. I can't do this. So it's almost like role playing, right? And she's describing this. She's making up a story for him, right? Now and then came an image that she had to hammer down, lest it spoil everything. And the image that she has to hammer down is the reality, right? The reality is he's very sick and he's dying, right? She would think of the real dim and sheeted body, drugged and shrinking every day in its rented hospital bed, glimpsed only a few times when Mrs. Jameson or the visiting nurse had neglected to close the door. She herself never actually coming closer to him than that. In fact, she had dreaded going to the Jamesons, but she needed the money, and she felt sorry for Mrs. Jameson, who seemed so haunted and bewildered, as if she was walking in her sleep. Once or twice Carla had burst out and done something really silly, just to loosen up the atmosphere. Okay, so there's an atmosphere over at their house as well, over at the Jamesons, but of course it's more clear what's causing it, right? And what's causing it is the fact that someone's dying in the house, right? Which in itself can be kind of a heavy thing, right? So she does something. So we see Carla as somebody who has this sort of people-pleasing quality of trying to maintain peace and trying to, give people what they want so that they're happy, right? So a very kind of feminine trait, right? But in some ways, that's actually what links her up very much also with Flora, because Flora is a very pleasing creature. Flora is there as a mediator, right? So she's doing the same thing. By the way, that's a really close, if you note, it's a very close relationship, okay? That Flora and Carla are very, very similar, right? Both of them run away, right? Both of them run away, right? Both of them play mediator, right? And that's why, of course, so what are the implications going forward after the end of the story for Carla, right? They're not good, right? If he's killed the goat, the implication is she could be not next immediately, but eventually, right? Okay, so once or twice Carla had burst out and done something really silly just to loosen up the atmosphere, the kind of thing she did when clumsy and terrified first-time horseback riders were feeling humiliated. She used to try that too when Clark was stuck in his moods. It didn't work with him anymore, but the story about Mrs. Jameson had worked decisively. Okay? Okay, can you put up your computers?